So here's what the DA manifesto looks like. It's very glossy. They went for that magazine effect. It's got these pictures of Musi at the front and, you know, man of the people type of feel that they were going for. They are showing their logo prominently at the back there, One South Africa for All. And when you dive in, the first thing that you have is this forward from Musi Maimane. From the forward, they move basically to the values where they speak about their ideology. And this is actually very important. And I'm going to unpack it as things go by. And also, please forgive my multiple annotations that are happening there. Just so you can see that I was engaging with the text, I guess. So anyway, it moves from there to their table of contents. I've just shown you the back page there in case you want to get in touch with them, get your own copy or something. But here's what it looks like in comparison to the EFF manifesto. They went for more for A5 feel. DA went for an A4. Similar vibe at the beginning, forward from Malema contents and then diving straight into it. But the difference is actually in length of the document. The DA document 82 pages, EFF 166, albeit I must say the pages are different. So in terms of their sizing, but that's just an initial feel for the document. The writing style is simple, accessible, and additionally, one could say that it has minimal errors in terms of typos, but I have seen a few here and there. But I guess that's to be expected with this kind of a document.
So let's talk ideology of the Democratic Alliance. Now, ideology matters as much as policy frameworks, and many times it does inform policy frameworks. So the Democratic Alliance can best be summated as being a conservative liberal movement or party. They are liberals, but they are conservative. And if you want to put them on the left-right divide, they fall right of center. And I'm going to show you why by explaining some of their policy positions which push them towards being right of center. In essence, they are like the Republicans, but they call themselves the Democrats. But if they were in America, they'd lean more right now in status quo on the Republican side, not so much on the Democratic side. Even though they use blue as a color and even though they use the name, it's still predominantly within the conservative liberal circle of things. But let's dive in. What is liberalism? Liberalism is a political ideology started by John Locke and Thomas Hobbes long time ago, but fundamentally it was in resistance to kings, to royal families, all of these elites and privileged people in society. And the concept was around the primacy of the individual. The individual is central to liberalism, and basically you want to leave the individual alone, let the individual do what they want and get out of the way of them living, fulfilling their dreams. Obviously, there's a need for a state to hold the monopoly of violence, to uphold the social contract. But aside from that minimum state that is required just to allow for the necessary conditions for liberty, that's all that the state involvement, that classical liberalism would want. So fundamentally, this concept of liberalism is based on three things: liberty, number two, equality, and number three, rule of law. This idea of liberty is expressed in the kind of freedoms that we have in the South African Constitution: freedom of movement, association, expression, religion, sexuality. All of those things are liberal ideals, and all of the parties in South Africa actually support those freedoms. So liberty is one thing. And then the second thing is around this concept of equality. Now, the DA speaks about equality of opportunity, but they don't really speak about equity. And that's something that you have to think about if you care about equity, because equality of opportunity says we all come to the door and we all deserve a fair chance. But considering the legacies of apartheid, considering the advantages that some people have accrued because of those legacies, generational wealth, private school learning, learning with tutors and coaches and all of these other things, it may not be necessarily the best way of looking at things. And any organization that identifies equality as being primary as opposed to equity takes positions that are not really in favor of affirmative action, not really in favor of BEE policies. And this is also manifested in the DA manifesto when you begin to look at their policy positions For instance, the DA does not want to have small businesses ascribing to BEE standards, and they also don't really ascribe to quotas. It's actually in their constitution and founding documents. You can check it from last year. They reject quotas. They believe in diversity, but diversity of the individual. Now, and what that means is if we're 10 white people or 10 black men in a room, we're actually all diverse because, you know, we all didn't grow up in the same home, we're raised by different parents, and we come from different backgrounds. That is the position that the DA takes on these kind of things. It's a classic liberal position. Lastly, what liberalism is about, it's also about this concept of rule of law, being able to protect the freedoms, being able to protect property rights, and the Democratic Alliance subscribes to this. They do have a modern take on their liberalism, and that modern take recognizes that in order for you to be free, the state has to provide you with some minimums: education, healthcare, security. And as such, the DA doesn't reject a welfare provision within the state. It doesn't reject providing education and all of those other kind of things, because that is modern liberalism as opposed to classical liberalism. But why do they fall into the conservative arm of liberalism, of the liberal wing of thought? One of the things that liberalism has done is to extend this concept of the individual to corporations. So corporations are also viewed as individuals, and if they're individuals, they're given the same rights that individuals are given. And this manifests itself differently when it comes to commerce. So what they want is minimal regulation. They want maximum privatization. They're pro-business. They're friendly towards business. They want open markets, open competition. And nowadays what people will say when they lean free markets is that they are in favor of the market economy. The EFF, on the other hand, is not in favor of a market economy. They're in favor of what is more in line with what is called a command economy. They want the state to be involved in SOEs. They want the state to be the instrument of providing redress, whereas the DA is more interested in making sure that minimum market regulation, maximum privatization, and in fact, they even want to privatize the SEDA, which is the Small Enterprise Development Agency. They want to privatize that as an example of their commitment to privatization. They want to encourage competition between Eskom and IPPs. They want to split Eskom up so that there's this one arm that is, selling the electricity, and they want that particular arm to compete at the municipal level with other entities for selling of electricity. This is very much in line with the kind of things you'd hear from the Republican Party, small government, lower taxes. In fact, they do want to have a lower tax of 15% for corporations, for example. So this is all very Republican leaning. So when you try to figure out where do they stand, they're not in the same position right now as Alexander Ocasio-Cortez. I chewed that name up a little bit, AOC, but you know who I'm talking about, because they are actually pro-immigration, they are actually pro-high taxation right now, whereas the DA is pro-low taxation. And ironically enough, the DA is actually anti-immigration in the understanding of it would be used in the liberal sense. They actually want to increase the number of troops at the border. They want to deport people who are here and undocumented. They want good immigrants, the ones with skills, that kind of thing. They don't necessarily want people who are just coming here escaping poverty, escaping starvation. They want you to come through the border with skills. And some of that is fair. Immigration does have to be controlled, but they really sound more like they want to build the wall than they want to allow immigrants to come in. So it's an interesting dichotomy, and this is why they fall into that category of conservative liberals. Now, where do they stand on the big issues that you may care about? Where does the DA stand on fees must fall and the decolonization of tertiary institutions? They do not support fees must fall. They do not support the decolonization of tertiary institutions. Their manifesto is strongly silent on decolonization as a concept. The DA takes an inclusive approach and not a transformative approach in terms of how they want to redress society. So they don't support that. Where do they stand on land, especially expropriation without compensation? The DA opposes that. What they want to do is provide people with title deeds. They believe that title deeds will solve the problem. So you'll get title deeds for RDPs, and they want land reform to be executed more or less in the frameworks that currently exist, which include willing buyer, willing seller, which include compensation, which you may not support, you may not be friendly towards. Your decision. I'm just letting you know where they stand on that. Where do they stand on the mining charter? They are opposed to the mining charter. They want to scrap the mining charter. Where do they stand on the nationalization of the Reserve Bank? They are opposed to it. So if these are kind of things that you care about, maybe for control, interest, for power, to make sure that your country actually owns and controls its Reserve Bank, the DA wants it to remain in the private hands that it's currently in. It wants it to remain independent of the state. They say it's to avoid the state stealing resources or printing more money, that kind of thing. Now, also, where do they stand on affirmative action policies? Generally against them. They actually don't want any BEE to be implemented in small to medium businesses. This is actually quite interesting because by their own definition, small to medium businesses comprise 98% of the South African business landscape. They don't employ as many people. They only employ around about 250,000. However, they are the majority of the business landscape. So the DA actually doesn't want any company which is making turnovers of 30 million to be subscribed to BEE laws or to be subscribed to the many labor restrictions that currently exist. So the DA is not pro-affirmative action. They are anti-affirmative action. Have I missed any? I'm just checking my notes now. No, I haven't missed any. DA believes in private property, market economy, individualism. That's where they fall in the spectrum. And that does affect a lot of their policies. And I've covered a little bit of them. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move specifically to the jobs and can they create the kind of jobs that they say they're going to create? Because a large part of their manifesto, this actual document right here, is just an economic blueprint coming from the DA. So we have to examine that. We have to unpack that. So let's move on to that right now. So where does the Democratic Alliance stand exactly on economic growth? How do they want to do it? How do they want to achieve it? Is it realistic? So let me tell you what their goal is. And their goal is actually quite similar to the EFF. What they want to do in the medium term, which is 3 years, is to grow the economy to 3%. It's currently growing at about 0.75. It's projected to grow at 1% when the whole year is being measured. So they want to grow that from 1 to about 3%, and they believe that they can get it done in 3 years. Post that 3 years, they want to get it done and growing between 6 and 8%. And they say that that's comparable to other African states which have been growing at those rates over the last few years. So a lot of people criticize the EFF for having unrealistic economic targets, but in reality, the DA economic targets are exactly the same. You can go look at the manifestos and confirm this for yourself. It's just a matter of fact. Now, the reality is that these targets are actually not feasible. It's very difficult to grow an economy from 1% and then increase that growth by 200% in the space of 2 years. Now, the DA says they can do it. Similarly, the EFF says they can do it. Both of them actually being a little bit overly ambitious and overly generous in the kind of promise that they are giving to the people. Some would say there's some mendacity in those kind of declarations. Now, the real challenge with growing the economy, especially if you're talking about increasing manufacturing, increasing agriculture, increasing also startups, etc., is that you're really competing with China, with Bangladesh, and you're also competing with automation. There's more and more stuff being made in those factories, China, Bangladesh, etc., and it's being made for cheaper and cheaper because robots and cheap labor are coming together to offer prices that are very difficult to beat. So what does the DA say that they're going to do? One of the things that they want to do is to have sector-specific minimum wages. So they don't want to have a blanket minimum wage as proposed by the ANC and actually being enacted of like 3,500. What they want to do is farming sector have your own minimum wage, startups have your own minimum wage, so that you can actually be competitive on a price point. I actually think this is a good idea. I do think a blanket minimum wage is not considerate of the distinctions that exist in particular types of industries. But realistically, this is not something that's going to happen in South Africa because the unions are very powerful. The DA doesn't have the kind of numbers. But even if they did have those kind of numbers, it would be very difficult for them to enforce the strike action, etc., etc. But the reason why, in principle, it's a good idea is because some agricultural farming sectors are very labor intensive as it stands right now. And Zimbabwe and Zambia and other countries are actually able to produce goods at a cheaper price because the South African farmers have to pay the specific minimum wage, and that reduces the number of laborers that they can actually get, and that actually pushes up the price or delays the amount of time that the turnaround time from them actually, harvesting the crop to getting it onto shelf. So that's an example of where this kind of a thing could work. But is it going to be enough to grow the economy by 1%, an additional 1%? Not necessarily. Now, the other stuff that they say that they want to do, especially to grow startups, is to have a startup visa to allow investors to come in to build startups in South Africa. Number 2, to have a business CODESA with Business Leadership SA and several other entities. The ANC has already done business CODESA, so I don't know what's going to be different about their particular business CODESA, or how that particular CODESA, which will come up with policies and laws which are favorable to big business, not necessarily startups, will actually create more business. But that's what they want. And then they want, as their signature thing, to remove BEE requirements for small businesses, to relax labor laws, to allow those small companies to be able to hire and fire people very easily, and also to adhere to the basic minimum work conditions, but not necessarily to minimum wages. So that's what they want to do. And they want that to apply to businesses that are operating at under 30 million annual turnover. They also want to privatize, as I mentioned earlier, SEDA, and they believe that they'll be able to create better entrepreneurial incubation under a private arm of that particular department. It's a department, it's what do you call it? It's an office that operates under the Department of Small Business Development, which has not been doing well, and neither has the NYDA. And the Youth Employment Service are not really going to create the kind of jobs that Cyril Ramaphosa and the ANC are proposing. But realistically speaking, neither will this. Are there some interesting ideas here? Yes, they want to have audits as well as to who gets employed in government departments. Very interesting ideas around how to do that, to remove, gender exploitation, to remove sexual harassment as an element, to remove sex for work, to remove, all of these nefarious incentives that are currently being manifested in the South African employment sector, particularly within the government sector. So that's what they want to do. In terms of from an industry perspective, what they want to do is have low tariffs. And one of the examples that they use is that they want to have low tariffs for the steel industry, and they believe that low tariffs will make the industry more competitive. They do also acknowledge, however, that they're going to lose a lot of workers from this low tariff system because they'll have to go lean to achieve that. But what they then say is that they'll upskill all these workers, and all these workers will have new skills, and it's really not cognizant of the dynamics that we have around education in South Africa, and cognizant of the amount of time it takes to upskill people with fourth industrial revolution skills, which are not like basic tuning and basic welding. They're really quite sophisticated coding, computer designing. It doesn't take a year to learn those skills. So realistically speaking, the DA is saying if they implement these low tariffs, they're going to lose those jobs. What they also want us to do is to have low taxes for manufacturers. So manufacturing corporations will be charged a 15% tax. Will that cheapen goods? It's difficult to tell, because sometimes those gains are just pocketed by the owners of those manufacturing companies. They don't necessarily retain more workers. Sometimes they even use those gains to buy more machines, to retrench more workers. So it's unclear whether or not giving them a lower tax will actually lead to more competitive pricing, and then a boost in manufacturing. But that's what they want to do. And one of their signature ideas is that they're just going to deal with a lot of the corruption, and because they've dealt with the corruption, they're going to be able to attract more investment. Is that a legitimate claim? To an extent it is. The DA has been able to be better at auditing, be better at financial management of the places where they govern. When it was under Athol Trollip, Nelson Mandela Metro had stronger accounting and audits, and also the Western Cape has consistently had stronger audits coming out of there. I do want to say something about one of the DA's messages, that they govern better where they govern, and to an extent they govern better in the high-end areas. I mean, we saw recently reports coming out that some lighting that had been got massive funding wouldn't actually go into places like Khayelitsha. Also, the education performance of the Western Cape, while it is high, is still very comparable to other provinces. There's nothing special that they've done to their education sector. It's still similarly comparable to other provinces. So they don't have actually like a good track record in that respect. They just have a normal track record for South Africa. So that's something to bear in mind. Now, in terms of will this work? No, not really. But there are some interesting ideas that the DA has put forth, which I think that should actually be embraced by all of the parties. And while they're more market friendly, I do think they're more realistic. I do think we need sector specific minimum wages. So I'm going to wrap it up in terms of just the finer granular details. I've given you an indication of where they are standing on their economic plans. I've given you an indication where they stand on their ideology and some of the signature issues which you may care about. Now it's time for us to go to that final section where we just review the manifesto holistically using the 5 criteria. So at We Vote, we came up with criteria based on 5 things. Number 1, relevance and clarity of the manifesto. Number 2, specifics. How many specific policies did you actually have, or were you relatively vague? 3, pragmatics. 4, creativity and originality. And number 5, the team that is actually going to execute it. Now, here's how I scored this particular manifesto, and I think it's actually fair. When it comes to clarity and relevance, the DA gets 7 out of 10. They correctly identified the problems in the country. They correctly identified the challenges we are facing, well-researched document, and they also were relevant to the needs of the South African community. So 7 out of 10 for that. When it comes to specificity, I'm running out of Woolworths water. They were relatively specific. There were some very vague things that they'll just have in their manifesto, like we're going to boost this, or we're going to do something to that effect, where they were vague without giving much policy direction. However, in general, it is a relatively specific document. I do disagree with Eusebius Makeza when he says it's ambiguous, because it also does refer to other more in-detail documents. Manifestos have a limit to how specific they can get without losing the audience. So for specificity, 7 out of 10. Excuse me for a moment there. Now, when it comes to the pragmatics, I've been very critical of manifestos in general, because I do think they need to be realistic. I do think when you're presenting your vision of how you're going to run the country, it has to be grounded in reality. And I don't think that the DA's document is grounded in reality. It's very, very airy-fairy, doesn't take into consideration the external and internal push factors for some of the things that they want to achieve. So when it comes to pragmatics, 5 out of 10. Right? When it comes to creativity and originality, I do think that trying to look at different ways to solve the problems in terms of, sector-specific minimum wages, in terms of like lowering tariffs, lowering taxes, these kind of things, they did apply their minds. They did try to like see what could be done differently within the South African context, the kind of like audits that they want to have for who got employed in the government, etc., and how it's going to be done, digitizing that process. I think they get 6 out of 10 for creativity and originality. Now, when it comes to the team, the actual people who are going to roll this out, I actually am not very enthused by the DA's team. I'll tell you why. Number 1, remember Gwen said that this particular party doesn't care about policy, doesn't care about ideas. Now, even though their manifesto, and you can see it a little bit because it doesn't cover everything holistically, and it doesn't develop much more than just their economic positionality and their ideological position. So some of the second half of the manifesto feels a bit lazy. So Gwen saying that really undercuts my trust in the team, number one, because she was the head of policy and she basically gave Musi Maimane and team 3 out of 10 or something to that effect, because she said, I can't trust you guys, I resign. And I think we have to take that into consideration. She's still a strong party member. She's high up on their list. So we have to take her viewpoints into regard. Secondly, Musi Maimane actually has been struggling to convince the party to adopt his particular preferred positions. And I think as a leader that demonstrates weakness, I don't think that he's got a unified front behind him. He's got lots of people coming for him. The party is fragmented in that Helen Zille is over here with her faction of classical liberals. Then you've got the socialist type of liberals, nationalist type of liberals on the other end. There's a lot of fighting. Musi's unable to control it. The rhetoric coming out of the DA basically is coming out from 3 different ideological camps. It's confusing. It doesn't indicate a solid leadership unit. Whereas, for example, the EFF, everybody's in line. You can see that they're running from the same script, so to speak. But I'm not convinced that everyone in the DA is rowing, in the same direction, right? Sometimes they may not even be rowing in the same boat. And I think that's a cause for concern. But also, I don't think that the DA has the gravitas to pull the people around their particular manifesto. I don't think it's where the nation is. Many people feel differently about land. Many people feel differently about the Reserve Bank. And even though their ideas are in principle worth exploring, I don't think that if they actually got into a government, they'd be actually able to do that. And that kind of dissonance with the people makes me doubt the quality of the team, because they designed these solutions. So even though they are relevant takes, I don't think that they are takes that will be digestible or palatable to the populace. And aside from that, I haven't been able to see these guys pull serious traction with young people, pull serious traction on the ground. It's all party machinery, it's all media, etc., etc. They are pulling the traction with their traditional voter base, but not necessarily a stronger voter base. And what that tells me is that they don't do ground politics as effectively as their political rivals. That makes me worry about the quality of the team when it comes to logistical organization. This particular manifesto was very, very late. The DA was first out of the blocks and last to present their policy manifesto. All of that time for 84 pages is just not enough. I don't have confidence in this team, and as a result, I'm giving this particular team 4 out of 10. Where does that take them as a total? It takes them to 59%. 5.9. That's where I think the DA manifesto fairly scores. That's a D. That's where they score. You may disagree, and you're more than entitled to disagree. Please comment below. Tell me what you think. I've tried to be as comprehensive as I can. I don't want to take too long. Some of the people said my other manifesto reviews were short. That's why we didn't discuss xenophobia and immigration positions. That's why we didn't discuss some of the stuff that you may have liked to, like mining charter. But we can still have those conversations in the comment section. Feel free to comment. Don't forget to like the video, share the video. Sorry I've been away. I'm at business school and it's just been like chowing me, it's hectic. And the last 4 weeks have really been like, new environment, working on calls, trying to do all of the things to make sure that, I have the chance of succeeding and getting to the next level as an entrepreneur. And business school matters to me from that perspective. So I'm trying my best. I'm going to try to make sure that I have content consistently moving forward. Very, very sorry to all of the people who, were enjoying the content and all of a sudden it's really hard to do this stuff when you're doing other things. I got work, I got business school. Then I also want to, have interesting political conversations. I haven't seen a DA manifesto review, so I was like, let me still do one. I know a lot of people were still expecting one, so I hope you enjoyed it. Till the next one, this has been We Vote, and I'm Mighty J and Me. Next time. I always mess up my conclusions. I'm going to work on better conclusions. That was not a good conclusion. So I'm going to leave this in there so you can see the kind of struggles that I'm having. But yeah, till the next video. Have a great day. Enjoy. Don't fight with nobody and behave yourself on Twitter.